This is House Planning Help, episode 259. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, I catch up with self-builder Mike Coe. Why catch up? Well, because he's been on the podcast a number of times before, but it's a year since our last chat, and there's a lot of progress at Portree Passivhaus. And I was thinking that I've known Mike for 5 years because I count that in documentary years. Mike is a retired cameraman. He used to work for ITV News for a number of years, but I managed to convince him to come out of retirement for various things. For the Harb, we also made a documentary together, and that's the 5 years bit, because I reckon it's around about 5 years since we started crowdfunding that documentary. Now, I'm well aware that you may not have listened to many episodes of the podcast. You might be relatively new around these parts. We certainly have some die-hard fans who are thinking, oh, not the documentary, you're not going to tell me about that again. But it's well worth going back into the archive to have a look, and we'll just play a quick snippet from the opening.
Britain's housing isn't great.
Buyers of houses in this country need to beware.
We build in the UK the smallest houses in Europe and the most expensive houses in Europe.
Is it the builders who are at fault?
Our builders are happy to build rubbish,
It's really shocking.
and they will carry on building rubbish as long as we let them.
We need them to start building better.
It's absolutely essential that when we build houses now, we build these houses for minimum energy consumption.
And I think we'll leave it there. If that's whet your appetite, we'll put a link to the full-length documentary in the show notes. All sorts of interesting people. I still look back at that list and think that's great. We had Ted Stevens, who was the former chair of NAXPA, one of the industry bodies. Mark Brinkley, who we love the House Builders Bible. We've chatted to him a few times. Brenda Boardman, who's done all sorts of interesting research at the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford University. And I was back actually at Oxford Brookes, where she gave a talk at the AECB conference. So I had a little chat with her. Andy Simmons, the CEO of the AECB. Paul Jennings, their leakage expert. Professor Kevin Anderson, who has quite a big following now and does a lot of good work into climate change at the Tyndall Centre, the University of Manchester. Jackson Moulding from Ecomotive. So it's all in there. I would encourage you to go and have a look at the future of housing. As mentioned, a link in the show notes. Mike Coe has been on the podcast a number of times before. It started all about his first self-build, the autonomous house. And I think he had no plans to leave the autonomous house. However, he was growing concerned about climate change. And that meant that he was really thinking about moving further north. And that did, in fact, happen. There was an episode that we did on selling the autonomous house. Obviously, it's a very particular house. So we looked into the challenges that come with selling a house like that. And then we caught up again when he was up in Portree and realised, oh my goodness, I'm doing another self-build up there. Portree Passivhaus. We looked at the design of the new house and we left things with the finances. They were a little bit tricky. He wasn't quite sure whether he was going to get to the end of the project, but he thought, if we leave this too long, we might never be able to even start this. So get going. And the good news is the superstructure is nearly complete. They're almost watertight, and we're going to hear all about that today. My first question was, how did the groundworks go?
The groundworks went fairly well. We had one small complication in that there was an area of at one corner of the house on the southwest corner where the ground was soft. And any complications like that obviously always translate into increased costs. So concrete had to be poured in order to provide a stable foundation. But most of it went fairly well. We have this stuff on Skye called rotten rock, which is a combination of the normal clay subsoil, but with volcanic small rock particles mixed in with it. And if you can hit that, you hit a very good, stable building material that you can build straight onto. And we were fortunate in that we found it, some of it on the site and some of it on our neighbouring croft. So there were a lot of digger and dumper journeys bringing this rotten rock over, but it avoids bringing in huge amounts of aggregate and other material from elsewhere. So Generally speaking, we did okay. We did well with the rotten rock, which is what everybody looks for when they're building on Skye. We also built the driveway up to the house using it as well. So that went pretty well. And the digger driver is only 20 years old. Young Master Robert, he I think his father runs there's only two local groundworks companies. His father runs Staffing Groundworks. So young Robert, I think he climbed straight into a digger out of his pram. And is massively skilled despite his extreme youth.
One of the challenges that you've got being on a slope is how you stabilise the house, how you get things level. So was it always going to be a case that you dig in to the earth, so you've got a retaining wall and you have to move the spoil somewhere?
Yes, that was the idea. In a sense, the slope of the site was part of its appeal, because anyone who remembers our previous self-build project, the autonomous house at Cropthorne, it was upside down. So we had the living areas upstairs and the bedrooms and bathrooms downstairs. But that was on a relatively flat site. So you came into the house and you normally came in and you went upstairs to the living areas. In this house, it was very appealing in that we could build again with the living area upstairs and more like a dormitory area below. But because of the slope of the site, we're actually able to have the main entrance on the upper floor with another secondary entrance down below. So in a sense, it works better and it makes for a more interesting house. It makes for a more interesting layout. Obviously, it becomes more expensive because, as you said, we have to dig into the hillside. But we've tried to minimise that to an extent in that the lower floor, which is partially earth sheltered, is not as large as the floor above. So we've minimised the amount of groundworks in a sense. But yeah, we had to build an earth retaining wall. Again, the local rotten rock makes this quite simple because the soil is more or less self-supporting. You almost don't need a retaining wall. You can just kind of you can make a steep cliff and generally it all stays there. All of the soil stays there. But yeah, a big earth retaining wall went in. The lower floor is partially submerged. The upper floor, which is the larger one, is at ground level where you enter at the back, and then there's a small mezzanine floor above that. So it's a 3-story house, but only one of the stories is full-sized.
And you're going masonry again. So can you just describe those first few layers and why you've chosen to go with a masonry house?
Well, part of the reason for masonry build is that the Cropthorne autonomous house worked in terms of using the structure of the building as a thermal store. So you build up heat during the summer, it gives it back over the winter. It's an unusual method of construction in the Highlands and Islands. Almost every house, even older ones, are timber framed in some form or another. Even if they're clad in blocks or bricks, they're basically the internal structure is timber. And I think some of that comes down to the local climate or weather patterns, in that you do get a lot of rain here. So in a sense, it's easier to put up a building quickly and get the roof on and make it weather tight if you build in timber or some kind of timber frame construction. But I wanted to stick with brick and block, which is much more familiar to those of us from the south, because the Cropthorne autonomous house worked, but also because climate change is a very important thing to consider these days. There's little doubt that things are changing, perhaps more dramatically than some people expected. And I think it's inevitable that we're going to get more extreme weather. We haven't had that much of it in the UK yet, but there's rarely a week when there isn't some kind of extreme weather event somewhere in the world, which makes it into the news. So I was also concerned about building a house that is structurally very strong, very resilient to high winds, torrential rain, all of these kinds of things, which could potentially, if it gets really, really bad, could damage a relatively lightweight building. So there were two reasons, really. It was thermal storage and resilience against unpredictable weather.
You're on an island. I get the unpredictable weather and how that could get a lot worse. But you've actually moved much further north from where you used to be. And when I'm saying we're in a heat wave down here and you're saying, I think it's 16 degrees today. So are you really expecting those high temperatures where you are?
Well, I think temperatures are increasing. Well, I know temperatures are increasing globally. So we're starting from a lower base, but yes, it's going to get warmer. It's not going to be hot all the time, but it's already been an advantage, even recently in the last few months when there's been temperatures in the 30s in the south, and we haven't seen anything above about 24, 25 degrees at the warmest. And I don't know how things are in the south at the moment, but today I think it's 17 degrees here. It's sunny, there's a light breeze, it's very, very pleasant. So yes, we're in a more temperate environment here, and that was a major reason for the move. Neither Lizzie nor I like the heat. Some people love it, some people don't mind when it gets into the 30s. Neither of us are comfortable, we wilt, we get grumpy and generally quite disagreeable. So it's more comfortable. But yes, I think this is the point, is that temperatures will rise everywhere, but we are starting from a lower base. So hopefully we will remain comfortable for longer. But also a prime facet of the whole passive house design procedure is resilience against overheating, as well as keeping warm in the winter. Protection against overheating is designed in, and we made sure that this house has well-planned shading. And again, the strategy of building high mass thermal damping also helps to avoid overheating if we get increasingly hot summers.
Let's talk through some of those details of the technical design. We've mentioned masonry, but you've also got quite a bit of steel in there. So can you talk us through how you're going from the base right up, what you're doing with insulation, all the nooks and crannies?
Fundamentally, the construction is very similar to Cropthorne. We started with, in effect, a tray formed of insulation, the floor insulation. So the tray contains the lower ground floor slab, which was poured into it. So that's completely isolated from the environment by insulation. And then all of the internal concrete block walls are built onto the edges of that slab. So you've got the internal part of the house is completely isolated. And then we've got 375 millimeter cavities with Teplo ties, the low thermal transmissivity wall ties, so that we don't lose heat through the wall ties. And we've used Knauf dry therm insulation, which was actually the same as at Cropthorne. It's a later variant, but it's basically the same insulation, which carries on right the way through up to the wall plate. And then on top of that, we've got now let's see, we've going to have a green roof, so this is an interesting new adventure, which I think is quite entertaining. So we've got a very substantial roof structure in order to take the weight of the soil on which the grass will grow on the roof. But below that, sitting on top of the I-beams, the structural I-beams, there's another layer of insulation. It's a solid block insulation, very similar to what you would put underneath the floor, so that can take the weight of the turf roof above. I mean, there are various embellishments on the outside which are not particularly to do with the thermal performance or anything structural, but were kind of what the planning department indicated to the architects they liked. And when the planning department says, well, we like this one, that means that there's a chance that they'll pass it. So the most expensive, lavish design with stone cladding and a turf roof was the one that the planning department said they liked. And so that is what we have ended up building. Not necessarily what we'd planned, but that's the basic structure. Yeah, brick and block, 375mm cavities, triple glazed windows, super insulated, avoidance of thermal bridges, and a turf roof, and stone clad on the outside.
That roof, I was looking at some photos on your website a little bit earlier. You've got I-beams, so you have a lot of masonry, even a beam and block floor on that main living space that you're going to have. But then I don't understand, why are you not continuing up to the roof? Is it just easier at that point to switch to I-beams, particularly when you've got all that soil that's going to go on top?
Well, the timber I-beams are strong enough to take the weight of the soil. The feeling was that we had enough thermal mass by that point.
Yeah.
So the internal structural leaf block walls are 6 inches thick, or 140 millimeters, I think they are these days. And then it's a beam and block suspended concrete floor. And I think that's enough. At Cropthorne, everything we could possibly make concrete, we did. So we had a concrete staircase, and we used old electric radiator blocks as well to make the kitchen wall. But I think we had more thermal mass than we need. I think we've reined it in a little bit with this design, and I think it's fine, because also there's the mezzanine floor, which is effectively there's an upper ground floor. First floor is also going to be timber. That's I-beams and timber, and a timber roof. I think it would also have been very difficult in construction terms to put a concrete roof structure onto this building, because you would have needed a crane in order to lift the concrete beams into place, and you can't get a crane to the site. This is a very common problem on Skye. Something that our contractor is very familiar with is that very often you can't get the machinery to the sites because there just isn't the access. The roads are tiny, they're halfway up a hill, there's lots of bends and things and steep slopes. So it would have been really difficult. You can't get a crane to the site, so anything very, very heavy you can't install.
So that's quite interesting, because you'd think your site is lavish for space. It may have that slight incline, but you've got a lot of room there, but it's actually the layout of Skye, typically.
Yes, exactly. Well, I was talking to Robert McQueen, who's our main contractor, a little while ago, and he was saying he used to own one of those, I don't know if you've seen them, they call them a telehandler, but it's like a forklift machine with a massive extending arm which can extend out about 15 metres. So you can pick pallets up and then you can move them 15 metres away and drop them down again. Amazing pieces of machinery. And we've actually used one on this project for one or two bits and pieces, but he said that he used to own one, but he ended up selling it because there were so few projects where there was access to get the machine to. He found that he was never using it. So he sold it, and when he needs one now, he hires one in. It's actually much cheaper to do that. So yeah, access is often a problem, and you often have, in some cases, access dictates what you can actually build, because you just simply can't build very, very heavy buildings. Certain forms of construction you can't use because typically, for an example, you can't get a crane there.
Yeah, makes sense. Just going back to climate change and to the materials that you're using, because there's a lot of steel, there's a lot of masonry. Do you not feel that you are contributing your fair share to climate change as well through building this house?
Well, I've said plenty of times in the past, the only truly environmentally benign dwelling, house, or any kind of building is the one that you don't construct. So, yes, there's undoubtedly embodied energy in this house. How significant it is in terms of global carbon emissions compared to things that could be very, very easily avoided, I don't know. In use, the house will have a tiny environmental footprint. It's very energy efficient. It doesn't have a heating system. It'll have renewable energy systems as well. But I mean, Lizzie and I were, I know it sounds naive because we've done this before. We were slightly surprised how big and how impressive the house is. Because you have meetings with the architects and they say, well, let's do this and let's do that. And I say, oh, that sounds great, yeah. And we're designing the steel, and that's going to cost, how many thousand? But now that the house is actually taking shape to the point where you can really see what it is, it's amazing how much steel there is in it. And yes, admittedly, there's a lot of concrete. On the plus side, there are no fired clay roof tiles or fired clay bricks. So those are very, very high CO2 emissions in manufacturing. So maybe it's not as bad as it might be. I don't know. People with massive brains can do incredibly complicated calculations and work out how many years it is before you kind of repay your carbon deficit. And I honestly don't know what those figures are, but it's probably something like 10, 15 years or so. The house begins to then have, you've repaid your carbon debt. But it was partly, as I mentioned earlier, the business of, the planning department of the 3 or 4 preliminary designs that were submitted by the architects in informal conversations. This was the one they liked. Well, blow me down. It's the biggest and most expensive of all of the dwellings, but it's got this stone cladding on the outside and it's got a lot of concrete in it. So yes, there are issues, but then when you look to the future, as I was just saying a short while ago, when you look to the future and the weather's going to become increasingly wild and unpredictable, this house isn't going to blow down. It's very, very heavy. And it's got a turf roof. The turf roof is also part of the resilience strategy because there are no roof tiles to lift off. Once you've got a well-established turf roof, it's all tied together by the roots of the grass. And it's not going to come off unless you have truly exceptional hurricanes. So, in a way, I'm not sure. People have suggested that we should have built thermally light, that we should have used timber frame construction and so forth. But then a timber framed house is not without environmental implications. Most timber now is imported from places like Indonesia. We chopped down all the UK's native forests, hundreds of years ago. There are still almost inevitably concrete bases, and there's still concrete in timber framed houses. So you can't build a house that has no environmental impact whatsoever. You have to look at it in the longer term, and you have to consider the uncertain future that we face, and that perhaps we do need to build houses which are resilient to extreme weather.
What about the scale? You've mentioned that it's feeling big. Did you let anything go there? You could have the same design, just take it down a notch. Or is it like me that I feel, in a way, if I'd built smaller on this particular site, I would have been losing money?
Well, that is a factor, isn't it? And this did come up as well. Architects will always say to you, I don't know what the phrase is, but like, don't underbuild for your site. Build a house that is proportionate to what the site can take. Because yes, although you're not, I know, and we aren't considering selling on, circumstances can change completely unpredictable, and you end up selling, and you think, oh, we've really thrown a lot of money away. We could have put a bigger house on the site. So the house is proportionate to the site, I think. It looks big. Some of the neighbours the other day said, oh, we didn't realise it was going to be so big. Well, the plans have been there for a long time to be looked at. It is only a 4-bedroom house, and the 3 bedrooms which are downstairs are not actually that large. Lizzie and I like to have our own bedrooms. That's something we prefer. So that's 2 of the bedrooms. The third one, although it will probably be a bedroom in for future occupants, it's going to be my sort of media studio where I do my music work and a bit of video editing and things. And then upstairs, we've got a little ensuite room for Lizzie's elderly mother, who we're hoping will be able to come and live with us for a while. So it isn't massive. There's also this point of when you've got 375mm cavities and then 200mm of stone cladding on the outside, the walls are very thick. So you look at the outside of the house and you think, oh, it's quite a large house. But then when you go inside, a bit like the old medieval castles, the rooms aren't that large because the walls are so thick. So it has a larger footprint for a house of this size than it would do if you built in a conventional way where the walls were only 6 to 8 inches thick.
Let's talk about your involvement in this project. You're the client. What else are you?
Well, this has never been a secret. I didn't want to do a second self-build. I don't think I've recovered from the first one. I think I've still got self-build fatigue from the first project. So in realising we weren't going to find...
Let's stop there. Self-build fatigue from the first one. How has that manifested itself? Because I felt tired at the end of the project. And to be honest, 3 or 4 months down the line, I know I didn't do anything near what you did, but I feel just much better. It's all out of my system now.
Yes, and you can appreciate the house, can't you? You can say,
yep.
Well, actually, this is what it was all about, and it's terrific. I don't think we had enough of that period at Cropthorne where we were able to just relax and enjoy the house. Because you do, when we finished the Cropthorne Autonomous House, I didn't like it. Not because I didn't think it was a nice house, I just didn't like the whole project because it had taken so much out of me and I'd spent so much time there and I put so much into it, and I was just tired out and I couldn't face another screwdriver or saw or paintbrush or anything. I just wanted to do something else entirely. But as time passed, both Lizzie and I began to really like the house because you start to forget all the horrors of construction and you think, yeah, actually it is fantastic. We're really lucky and privileged to be able to live somewhere like this, and the hard work was worth it. And I don't think we had a sufficiently long recovery period before launching into this one. So the plan was, okay, having accepted that we would be building again, let's try to afford to have most of the work done by contractors, specialists, electricians, plumbers, whoever's required, so that we can be a bit more hands-off. We've proven our willingness to work, ability to take these tasks on. Let's be a little bit more hands-off. But, of course, nothing works out quite as you expect, and multiple factors conspired to have me back on site almost constantly. The biggest problem being the huge increase in construction costs between the original estimate provided by a quantity surveyor and the real-world tenders that we got when we put it out to tender, the real-world quotes that we got from a very limited number of potential contractors in this area. So we chose the one we could afford, but it was more than we wanted it to be. We had to take out certain parts of the project so that we could make it affordable, which basically meant, well, okay, we'll take out the electrics and I'll do that because that's something I can do, and we'll take out the mechanical ventilation system because that's something I can do, and furthermore, there isn't anybody here who can do it. Well, there are people here who can do it, but not Passive House standard. But then beyond that, we've also had, the building team are pretty good, to be fair. They're a good company and they're nice people to have around. But some of the Passive House stuff, it's been very hard getting the message through. It's been very hard getting through to the bricklayers and other people. It's like, the Passive House means things have got to be done to a very good standard. It's all about kind of during and post-construction quality control and trying to get across the message that the insulation has got to be kept clean and dry, difficult in this climate, clean and as dry as possible and put in neatly without any gaps. I don't know why. It's just proved to be very tough. So I've actually ended up doing a lot of quality control type work on insulation. I've spent weekends pulling insulation out, cleaning it, putting it back again. And I've taken on the upper parts of the insulation where it has to be cut to fit the slope of the roof. I've basically said, look, leave all of this to me. I'll do it. And then if it's not right, then at least we know it's my fault and nobody else can be blamed. So I've ended up well and truly back on site. And as soon as the sarking ply goes on the roof, which will happen in the next couple of weeks, and I shall be involved in that because that's a critical airtightness detail, is that we've got to get the roof airtight. And as soon as that's happened and we've got a more or less weather-tight building, then I'll be starting on electrics and MVHR. So there has been no escape, unfortunately, from the original plan. It's like, well, if we can afford it, we'll just get a contractor to do the whole thing. And then that kind of got reined into, well, we can't quite afford it, so I'll do just enough. And then it's like the job has kind of grown all on its own. So I've actually ended up being on site quite a lot. And that's the way it's gone.
How much of this is perfectionism versus, if you'd been down in Cropthorne speaking remotely to this lot and you come back and the house had been finished, do you think you would notice a big difference and the performance would be that different? I know what you're saying, and I'm sure lots of little gaps and things like that, but when you're going a masonry approach, I wonder how precise. Obviously, every little gap is going to make a difference, but how much difference?
It's impossible to say, really, isn't it? I am a Capricorn, so I'm naturally fastidious and nitpicking and therefore difficult to get on with. So I want things to be perfect. But I also want things to be perfect if I'm spending this much money on a major project like this.
Yes. That's fine. But it sounds like the team are just, it's Mike, we'll let you do that. Has that been okay, that relationship?
It's been fine. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've found that I can get on with people on building sites very well because I've done so much stuff myself. So, we talk the same language. Actually, there's a minor, slightly amusing diversion, which I'll come back to on that. I haven't found it to be a problem. It wasn't a problem at Cropthorne. It's not a problem here. I keep out of their way. I don't interfere. But I am in effect taking on the role of the Passive House sort of quality control operative. So there would have been somebody doing this anyway, even if it wasn't me. If I'd been able to afford to pay somebody to do it, there would have been somebody on the site saying, this has got to be done this way. That isn't quite right. It'll have to be redone. That hole's going to have to be filled in. So I don't think it's a problem. But if you're reasonable with people, and they're reasonable people themselves, I don't think there's ever a problem, really, unless you happen to be unlucky and get someone who's incredibly stroppy. But luckily here, they're all nice blokes, and really not a problem at all. As for, would the house have been as good if it had been not supervised at all? It's very difficult to tell, but I would say, looking at the state of some of the insulation, I think there would have been a measurable, if not perceptible by humans, I think there would have been a measurable shortfall in the performance because there were holes in the insulation. Some of it was really mangled up. Some of it was filthy dirty. And when you've got dust and concrete and the delightfully named snots, mortar snots, embedded in insulation, all of those materials are hygroscopic, so they absorb water from the atmosphere and become thermally conductive. So I think the performance would have been compromised had I not exercised this quality control that I've been doing. By how much, it's really, really impossible to say, I think.
Well, the big one is the steel, really, that you spotted that potential thermal bridge.
Yes, I did. Yes. And this was this was lack of experience, I suppose. Even architects and engineers who haven't encountered this form of construction before can get caught out. And there were one or two issues, in fact, but there was a very obvious one, which I didn't, but nobody spotted until the steel was actually in place, is that there were two quite chunky pieces of steel I-beam bolted straight across the cavity in the west-facing wall from inside to out. So you'd got just the most incredible two thermal bridges straight across the cavity. There were one or two others that were easily eliminated by slightly modifying the structure of the steel, but this particular one, the engineer wouldn't budge, because I was saying, well, can't we just take these out? I can't see that they're necessary. And it was like, well, no, we can't. They're required to basically to make sure that the building doesn't fall down. So that was a tricky one, and maybe I should have looked more carefully at the plans. But sometimes you don't spot things until they're actually constructed, until they're in place. But after a good deal of negotiation and some advice obtained online from other architects around the world, because we're very fortunate, Lizzie and I, we're known for our Cropthorne autonomous house. So if I post an inquiry online, I get lots of useful replies from people who really know what they're talking about. And the suggestion was that we could perhaps shorten these two bridging pieces of steel, put thermal break pads in, so basically little bits of insulation, and use stainless steel rather than normal steel bolts, and that would significantly reduce the transmission across those two pieces of steel. So that in fact is what we've done. So I'm fairly happy that, okay, we've still probably got a little bit of a thermal bridge there, but a very bad situation has been turned into a perfectly acceptable one.
The superstructure now is pretty much there. Do we say windows in is the last bit, or do we have to have the cladding on as well?
Well, some windows are going in as I chat. In fact, I'm just looking at the live webcam, and yep, there are windows going in. The stone cladding has started, and there are various other bits of carpentry going on. So there are multiple processes taking place at the moment. So we're actually in a period of quite good progress. We've had quite quiet periods in the past, which were very frustrating. Fundamentally, the contractor had agreed to do quite a large extension to a small local hotel, turning it into a medium-sized local hotel, which was due to start at the end of this year's tourist season, so September or October or whatever. They might have been starting to go and prepare the site. But what happened was, about 3 or 4 weeks after starting our house, which was very well staffed initially, the local hotel company came to the contractor and said, we want to bring this forward. We want to start this extension immediately. Meaning that for a local contractor, our house is quite a big project. The extension to this hotel was an even bigger project, but he couldn't really turn them down because this particular hotel company have used him on a number of occasions. I think they have a good relationship. It's a bigger project than ours. I think it's like a £2 million extension or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but so he couldn't really say no. So what happened was his staff were spread rather thin in order to get the hotel extension underway, but still keep building our house. So that slowed things down quite a lot. So it's been frustrating in some ways from that point of view, but not really his fault.
This is common though, isn't it? I can name a number of situations when this has happened, and I actually feel very, very grateful on my own project that my contractor must have a good process for this, of saying, well, basically, you're after this project. I can't specify the exact date. I can tell you roughly when it's going to happen. And they may have done little bits and pieces during the project, but nothing at all.
No, it sounds as though your project was quite well managed, doesn't it? And I guess you had a project manager on site, did you, quite often? Or
here's a question. Is it worth getting your architect? Was that the difference, that someone who really knows what they're doing? You're paying more, obviously, but was that the whip cracking and contract and following progress, having these meetings saying, where are we with the schedule? Are we bang on time? They've obviously done lots of developments before, but it's a big problem, isn't it? If the hotel, as you say, big business who's probably going to have more work down the line, what do they do?
Oh, they have. Yes, they've got more work lined up. Yeah.
Well, I hope that one sorts itself out. We have to talk a little bit about money, because when we left things last year, you knew you could get a certain way. You don't sound like you were, burying your head in the sand. You think you'll be able to get to the inside bit and keep on track there?
Well, every cloud has a silver lining, doesn't it? And the delays that we've experienced have actually meant that we've been spending money more slowly than we expected. And since Lizzie and I are both pensioners now, we've got pensions coming in. So for every month that we delay, we get another pension payment each. So we haven't spent as much of the cash reserves as I expected we would have done at this stage. I'm doing the electrics and the MVHR anyway. I think I always would have done, to be honest, although I would have grumbled and complained about it. I think I always would have done those because those are the sort of things that I do. So I would say, I won't tell you what the figures are, but at the stage we're at now, which is about to become weather-tight and stone cladding going on, we've spent about half of the money that we started with.
Wow, that's really good, I would have thought. I know, obviously, finishes cost a lot of money and things like that, but the important thing is you getting to watertight, first fix, be able to finish off a few rooms. So that's really good. Well done.
I would say with very, very cautious optimism that we probably will get to the end. And I would really like to just be able to arrange for the contractor to install the bathrooms, put the kitchen in, do all of the internal carpentry, and the absolute dream would be to be able to have somebody else do the decorating, because we decorated the whole of the Cropthorne house, and that wasn't as big a house as this, and that takes a long time. That's really, really hard work. So it'd be really nice to be able to afford professional decorators, but we'll see how it goes. It's not the situation at the moment, the financial situation at the moment is not dire. It's not too bad.
Would you agree with me that when you get watertight, you're actually about halfway through the project?
Yeah, probably. It's a significant point, isn't it? It's a point at which you can actually start to clean up the interior. In the case of any building on the Isle of Skye, pump the water out, and you can start to get on with the internal fitting out. So that feels like a turning point, and we are fairly close to that. In terms of what's halfway, I don't know. You know, if the way things are going with this hotel extension mean that more of RK Joinery's men are freed up, then they'll arrive on site and things can get done remarkably quickly. If you've got 15 men working, which I think is about the size of the company, things can move on very rapidly. So time-wise, it's very difficult to say. In terms of the whole project schedule, yeah, it's probably about halfway, probably slightly more than halfway when you look at a building which has such a complex design, it's so difficult to construct. There's a lot more work gone into getting to this stage than there would have done if it was just like a rectangular box built on a flat site.
Is there anything else we should know about this stage of getting things going into construction and putting up the superstructure?
No, I think we've covered pretty well everything. I think you can see now it is going to be an amazing house. You can start to see some of the architectural input beginning to make sense. You can see how the kind of the vision of the architect is translating into a building it is going to look fantastic, and it is going to be an amazing building to live in. We're still some way from that, but you can see that it is going to be quite exceptional. It's nothing like anything else in this area. Absolutely. There's no building probably on the entire island, and probably you can draw a circle out into the highlands of about 30 miles radius. There's nothing like it. So it is quite an exceptional thing. Whether we've done the right thing in terms of using all this steel and using all this concrete, who knows? I don't know. Time will tell, I suppose. But yeah, it is going to be great, but we are nowhere near complete yet. There is still an awful lot to do.
Should we catch up next year?
Next year, yes.
Well, I think we've followed your whole journey in year increments. So, we'll be checking back. This could be, I'm expecting the next one actually to be the one where you're going, oh, why did we do this again?
Well, yes, I'm certainly not doing it a third time. We might have moved in this time next year.
That would
I think
be good.
There's a chance. So the Cropthorne took 3 years. This would be taking 2. Maybe even before that. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Well, all the best, and we'll speak soon. Head online to take a look at the show notes to accompany this session, houseplanninghelp.com/259. We've got our summary there, also a few photos of the groundwork right through as the superstructure nears completion. And don't forget their website as well. We'll link you across. Actually, if you're one of our hub members, you can go in depth because Mike gave a very good presentation showing a lot of those details as well around the building and talking us through those. So that's in the hub archive. But for the show notes today, houseplanninghelp.com/259. Talking of the hub, we're working on an upgrade. I wanted to tell you more today, and I thought, that's probably silly. Wait till we're ready to go, because we're always trying to make this better. If you don't know what the hub is, well, it's a digital archive really, and we're trying to simplify the self-build journey. That's my mission here, and we always know that we'll be working towards that because it's just such a huge thing. There are so many moving parts. But the way that we do that is to help you get your head around the choices that are available to you and to get a deep understanding of the process before you're in it. Sometimes you just can't do that. You just have to be in the process. But that's the idea. We like to use as much video as we can because I enjoy making video. I enjoy doing podcasts, making everything multimedia. And we've got various different features and resources that you can find out about. I'll let you go and have a look at houseplanninghelp.com/join if you haven't already. That's as far as we take things for today. Thank you so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.